All right, everyone, we are at the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Designing High Structure Renewable Assignments with Peter Wallis. I'm Amy Soulmaker, I'm the moderator. And as we're coming in, Peter's asking you to put in the chat your role, just to get an idea of where folks are coming from. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Peter.
All right, thank you, Amy. So thank you again, everyone, for putting in to the chat your your roles and what the main work you do is. That's really helpful for me to understand who's attending. The other thing I really want to understand about you, and in case you haven't already figured this out, this is going to be a very interactive session. I'm hoping I have some active learning exercises for us later in the session because we're talking about structured renewable learning, and I'm trying to create that here as much as I can. So the other thing I'd love for you to share, and I am scrolling through and reading through the roles of folks. We have a really great mix of faculty, of designers, of a couple of technologists in there. The other thing I'd love for you to put into chat early on here is, what are you hoping to get out of this session? If you have a thought about what you'd really hope to see, what you'd like to learn, I'd love to hear that. Just to give a quick bit of background on me, I'm currently director of learning systems, of instructional excellence, and of assessment at UW Continuum College. So I work with learners and teachers ranging all the way from high school up through retirement and everything in between. A lot of lifelong learners. With us, Holly, thanks. Bolstering or utilizing OER is definitely something we're looking at. I'm also a researcher. I'm currently a doctorate student, and I have a pretty broad background in research. I've published on active learning. I've published on data and data ethics, actually in hybrid pedagogy, and I published on neuroscience. I've done original neuroscience research. And what I've found across all of those is that, or certainly what has called out to me across all of those, is the ways that we could do more to utilize all the intellectual activity that we create in universities. I love intellectual activity. I love people being really engaged in work that changes the world. And I'm really interested and fascinated by how we create activities and infrastructures to make that as broad as possible to include everyone. And that's why I've been working more and more with OER, more and more with open pedagogy, and most recently with renewable assignments. And my most recent research with Jen White in our biology department here is on how to create renewable assignments, high structure, that can really work for a wide variety of students. And I'll talk more about exactly what those are. Thanks so much to those who are putting into the chat what they want to see in this. Keep that coming if you want to, and please do ask questions as we go. I'll get to them as I can. There will also be, like I said, a good bit of active learning in this session. But before all of that, before I answer your questions, I do want to start out with a land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional lands of the Duak-Duabish, the Duwamish, the Muckleshoot, Coast Salish tribes, and that those lands were taken by a treaty that has not been honored. I also recognize that the people of these lands live and research and work on, and that the history of the university is built on a lot of free and enslaved labor. I invite you all to take a moment to recognize the lands on which you work and the labor that forms the background of a lot of the work that we do. So with that in mind, and with hopefully a moment of pause and of coming back to ourselves, I want to talk today about what a high structure renewable assignment is, why I care about this, and then we'll try creating a few together once we have that context fully in hand, and once you kind of have had a chance to think for yourself about high structure renewable assignments. I'll share some learnings and research and some examples that I've found. And finally, we'll spend a little extra time together working on applying high structure renewable assignments and learning to your context. I hope that answers the questions that are already coming in the chat, answers the things that you're looking for. It looks like it will, but again, anytime you want, please do. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. Please do enter into chat if you have kind of continued questions. I always like to start with why, and you should all be able to see my Pressbooks page here. If you want, I will put the link to this Pressbooks in the chat. The other thing you can do to interact with this session is to go into that Pressbooks page and use hypothesis. That's this annotation sidebar over on the side here. You can select a chunk of text. You can add an annotation. You can highlight something. You'll see that a partner of mine has already gone in and worked through and given me feedback. I would really appreciate any feedback you have. There are particular places where I'm asking for contributions, and I am actively looking for research partners in this work. This is a very open piece of work while it is about open pedagogy. So why structured renewable assignments? And I'm going to try not to read off of this too much, and I invite you not to read too much either. We know from multimedia learning that that some of the reading and the auditory processing can get in the way of each other. So as I have this on the screen, maybe just let the words slide by, pay attention to the headers more than anything else. But why am I interested in structured renewable assignments, and why do I think you should be interested too? I think that many of the problems of teaching today are not problems of pedagogy, they're problems of power. Sometimes they're problems of pedagogy that masquerade as, or problems of power that masquerade as problems of pedagogy, but really the teachers that I know want to teach well. They want to teach excellently. Often in our systems and the ways that our systems are built, they are not given the time nor the ability nor the chance or the opportunity to create the expertise, to create the structure, to create all the things that they want to create to teach well, and that we want to create in order to teach well. I know in my role as a instructional designer that I've held in the past, in roles as a learning systems specialist, I often don't have the time to work through these things. And I've taught, and I understand the rush of starting a quarter. I understand the rush of trying to get all those things together while your head is still spinning from grading from last quarter. I understand the rush of updating a syllabus and thinking about, oh, it'd be great if I could find this thing or build this assignment, but I just don't have time. And that schedule is not chosen by teachers. I don't know of any group of teachers that have come together democratically and said, you know what, we'd really love to be on a quarter system, and we'd really love to try to fit everything that we want to give to these students in 10 weeks. I also don't know of a democratic assembly of students who have come together and voted on, yes, I'd love to cram my head full of everything I can fit into it in 10 weeks and then go drink for a week to try to process all of the stress of doing that and then come back and do it again a week later. I believe and I trust that students want to learn well, and they want to contribute, and they want to do good work in the world. And often they are not given the opportunity. They are not given the choice to do that. They're trying to work in a system that has been built on oppression of people, going back in history and currently today. You know, and I've read kind of the reflections of teaching assistants and of graduate students and of adjunct faculty. Adjunctification obviously is a huge issue. So how does, okay, Peter, all of these real problems, we understand that they're real problems. How do structured renewable assignments help with this? It's just one small way of helping. And it's not, there are a lot of people tackling this from a lot of areas. This is not the be all end all. It's one set of designs, design principles, design ideas that I believe can help in a few specific ways. The first thing that they can do is they can continue to create open educational resources. We know from research that open educational resources, this is particularly thinking of the research of the Dewar Group, the open educational resources can increase the persistence of students, especially students from disadvantaged backgrounds. They can increase the engagement of students in courses. The second thing that that structured renewable assignments, I believe, can do is they can really, we've done research that shows this, and I'll talk about this more later, is that structured renewable assignments can help students see themselves as knowledge creators and as part of the knowledge creation process. And that's a part that I'm intensely fascinated by. How do we get more people involved in creating useful and usable knowledge? Now, that's all the renewable and open education part of it. Why structured? Structured because none of us have the time or the opportunity to process everything that's being produced, right? I believe the numbers are something like 1.4 terabytes of data go live on the internet every day. If every assignment across every class were renewable, were contributing to open educational resources, it would be a small stream in that mountain of data, and we still wouldn't have time to read all of it and to give detailed feedback on all of it. And so the other thing that I want structured renewable assignments to do, and that I'm trying to do design research to figure out how they can do, is to really create an infrastructure in which people can make a maximum contribution while they learn and while they actually understand the material better and get feedback on whether or not they understand the material. So that's the broad overview of what I'm going to try to talk about today. That's the philosophical background of why I care about this so much. Now, I want to acknowledge that parts of this work are the gifts of Indigenous scholars like Megan Bang, Robin Wall Kimmerer, white scholars like Michel Foucault, Robert Caro, Robin DeRosa, and scholars who are the descendants of enslaved people, Langston Hughes, Angela Davis, two important figures for me, and scholars with recent immigration backgrounds like Rajiv Giannani and Sanjay Sarma. And there are many others with and without academic credentials who have thought and worked on learning, equity, power, design-based research that are really important. So my objectives for this session, what I really want you to take away is an increase in your ability to recognize structured and renewable assignments, a session that helps you create better structured renewable assignments and helps you find ways to apply structured and renewable assignments to your world. So I want to start with a pre-reading poll. And if you're willing, you can go to this and a pre-presentation poll, really. If you're willing, you can go to this link in the press books and do this H5P activity for yourself. Which of the following are structured renewable assignments? Learners writing chapters for an open textbook, learners using a detailed rubric to evaluate paragraph-sized contributions to an open textbook, learners suggesting and getting feedback on entries for an open glossary on the course subject, learners finding and editing a Wikipedia page, learners creating a peer instruction cycle, 5-minute talk, answer cycle. I don't know if all of you are familiar with peer instruction coming from Mazur out of Harvard, and then they contribute comments from their answer to a repository of thinking about the topic. So, pre-test is different on the link. The responses may be in a different order. Is that what you're seeing, or are you seeing a totally different? Thank you, Gwen Ellen. Are you seeing a totally different? Interesting. Okay, I'm getting a couple people with different order, getting someone with totally different. You could, yeah, they are set to be in a different order. So you will have to do a layer of interpretation there. You can also enter into the chat here if you like answers that you have. Okay, got it now. So you may see a different order of the response options. Holly, thank you so much. This is pre this is a before, and nobody's seeing your answers, right? This is the other nice thing here. I'm not showing poll responses up on the screen. So as folks come in, this is a chance to test your own understanding of these concepts. This is a chance to know how much you understand. So let's walk through it together. And this is fantastic. And I hope you feel like it's fantastic, because part of what we want to do is we want to call up the learning here and say, okay, what have I not learned yet? What do I think I know that I don't actually know? Okay, so which of the following are structured renewable assignments? Learners writing chapters for an open textbook. That's a good one. It's renewable because the students, the whole idea of renewability are that students are contributing to a resource, right? They're not disposing of the assignment. As a teacher, you're not disposing of their submissions right after they start. So the whole idea of renewability, and we'll come back to this in a minute as I dig a little bit more into the research, the whole idea of renewability being that students' assignments are not treated as disposable, students' work is not treated as disposable, their time is not treated as expendable, it's treated as a resource that can go on and continue to build resources for the next generation of students, right? I love to think about the idea of seventh generation, again, referring back to Indigenous knowledge and scholarship, right? 7 courses from now, what is the value of a current student's contribution going to be? A truly renewable assignment is going to have the students' contributions are going to have an impact, a positive impact, 7 generations of students later. So absolutely, learners writing chapters for an open textbook, renewable, but probably not really structured, right? At least not in the way it's written here. So saying, hey, here, students, I want you to write a chapter for the open textbook. Well, what does a chapter look like? How am I supposed to think through a chapter? Not a lot of structure. Learners use a detailed rubric, hey, that might be structure, to evaluate paragraph size contributions to an open textbook. Oh, contributions to an open textbook, so probably renewable. And I'll walk through this. Learners suggest and get feedback on entries for an open glossary. Well, open glossary, that's a lot, the chunk size there is a lot smaller than a full textbook chapter. So yeah, might be fairly structured. Suggesting and getting feedback, great learning practices, and clearly open glossary, renewable assignment. Learners find and edit a Wikipedia page. How do they find it? Who guides them into what to find? Right? Not particularly structured. Again, totally renewable, totally active learning, can be a fantastic assignment, can be made structured, but not stated as structured here. Learners complete a peer instruction cycle. They answer a multiple choice question, they talk about it, they answer it, they contribute comments to our repository about thinking. Where's the renewable? Where's the open? Where do things go that go into this repository? So in this case, I would say not renewable. So obviously I wrote this, but I wanted to walk you through my thinking on that. Thank you to everyone who went along and tried it themselves first. So let's dig into each element of that. First, and these are really the design roots for me of high structure renewable assignments, right? These are the bodies of research and teaching knowledge that that this idea of these assignments comes out of. So active learning being one of the most important ones. I kind of hope that we all are at this point where we've seen the research on active learning. Certainly Freeman and all contributors in 2014 came out with a meta-analysis that concluded that students learning actively rather than learning passively was so powerful that if it were a drug trial, we would actually end the control being passive learning, and we would have everyone just go into active learning like there'd be an emergency stoppage of the drug test, because it was unethical to have people continue to passively learn when active learning is shown to be powerful enough actually, that it moves all students up one grade point, and it moves marginalized students up a full grade, right? So a student from a relatively privileged background, a relatively immune to underprivileged background, would go from a B to a B minus, and a student from a marginalized background could go from a B to an A simply by changing passive learning to active learning. Active learning is really about involving students in solving the problems, using the mental tools that they're learning right as soon as they're learning them. At the very bottom of this page, for anyone who wants to try themselves again, they can look at, or they can do this evidence poll, active learning evidence, evidence for active learning's positive impact on student learning is, and as I just spoke about, empirically strong, right? We know from empirical research from really well-designed controlled studies that active learning improves student outcomes. It does have some strong theory behind it for anyone who's wondering, and it does increase student engagement. Nice, got it right on the first try. That's kind of what I'm hoping. I'm hoping this will build the confidence back up. We'll get back to it. I'm going to move on to renewable assignments. Like I said, really happy to take questions at any point during this. So if you have a question about active learning in particular, it's a great time to ask it in the chat. But I'm going to move on to renewable assignments. Right. So this is the second body of knowledge, right? Really developing body of knowledge. And what renewable assignments, as I said earlier, they're really about creating a context in which students' contributions are maximized, in which student assignments are used to contribute to public knowledge, to the knowledge commons. I really like David Wiley's metaphor for this. He says that, traditional education in terms of students using all this intellectual energy and intellectual power that they have to turn in an assignment that's then, put into a file folder, that's then put into a Canvas page and just kind of sits there and does nothing. It's like driving an airplane down the road. Like, I could get to Portland from Seattle by driving an airplane down the road in, my 747, just trucking it. It would get there. It would be slow and painful, and none of you would be happy with me as a pilot. But but with all that power, we could fly, we could get there faster, we could all be happier. So the question for me of renewable assignments is, how do we use all the power of student intellectual engagement, of interest, of intelligence to do something better, faster, and less disposable? Wiley and Hilton in 2018 proposed a 4-part test for renewable assignments. I really like this test. I think it's really useful. There's some ways that I would nuance it, but the 4-part test that I think is really great is, are students asked to create new artifacts like essays, poems, videos, songs, etc., or revise or remix existing OER? So either create something new or revise or remix, edit, contribute to existing OER. Does the new artifact have value beyond supporting, the learning of its author? And one thing I want to emphasize is that a fair amount of learning sciences research shows that giving a student something that has value beyond supporting their learning actually supports their learning, right? They learn things better. And we know this, right? We know that me as the presenter, I'm learning these things better because I understand that I'm going to have some form of public presentation to you, that I'm going to feel some extra onus to understand this material, hopefully, to give it back to you, and that's going to help my learning, help me be engaged. Are students invited to publicly share their new artifacts or revised or remixed OER? And are students invited to openly license their new artifacts? or revised remix OER, right? A 4-part test, really easy to go through. Okay, for this assignment, yes, this is true, this is true, this is true. Oh, this assignment, it's missing the invitation to publicly share. Let's just put that in, right? So this can be function both as a checklist of whether or not your assignment is renewable, and it can function as a guide to creating renewable assignments, right? A few examples are on this page. I won't spend a lot of time on them because I hope by this point you get the idea, and we're going to dig further into some I think some really fun examples later of different forms of renewable and non-renewable assignments. But I think one of the things is that learners creating or editing Wikipedia pages about the environmental sciences, right? Fantastic. It's work that needs to be done. We need better environmental information out there today, available to people. And so I think this renewable assignments are really great. And Michael, I see your question in there. Do you worry about student data when having them renew and create public work? Fantastic question. I really, really appreciate it. I have there's a passage later in the text about this, but I'll speak to it now. I think that this word invited is really important. And part of this comes from my background as a learning systems director, as someone who thinks about the technologies that we're exposing our students to. The real important thing here is that we invite students to do this work, not that we require them to do this work. And I really want to emphasize this point. And the reason I emphasize this point is a couple of reasons, and thank you, Gwen Ellen. I hope I'm getting your name right or close enough, for asking about copyright in the chat as well. So I emphasize the invited piece here, both because of data privacy and because of copyright. I think there is, and thank you, I think that there is a tendency in the rush of getting things done, and this goes back to the question of power, and like, yes, I want students to be interactive, so I'm going to find a way. Sometimes we can forget that by partnering with corporations, one of the things corporations want out of our students is their data, right? Period. And they want that data in order to build systems that in many cases better control students, right? In ways that we as educators are often not very comfortable with. And so I think we need to be very cautious about giving our students data to people who don't have agreements to use that data ethically. And we should be very cautious about requiring students to give up their data, right? Because it's their data, it's not ours. And so we can invite them to share it publicly or revise or remix. We can invite them to openly license their contributions, but I don't believe we should require them to do either of those things. Now, let's say you've got a Wikipedia assignment. Your assignment to a student is go edit this Wikipedia page. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think many students love that. How would you do that in a way where it's an invitation rather than a requirement? And this is where I think it really comes into a question of design. And this is why I'm interested in this as a design practice, because it's not one thing. It's not just, okay, now we're just going to apply renewable assignments to everything across everyone, right? It's really embedded in these practical pieces of knowledge about how to teach. So for a Wikipedia assignment, one thing you might do is say, if you're uncomfortable putting your work on Wikipedia, or you don't want to openly copyright it, or you don't want Wikipedia to have the data of who you are as an editor, then edit that Wikipedia page and submit those edits to me in a Canvas assignment in a Word, right? The student can choose to make that assignment less renewable, to not make that contribution to the public. That's their choice because it's their work. But you invite them, you say, I'd love for you to do this. I think it's more meaningful if you do this, but it is your choice ultimately to do it. And some examples, I saw a question in the chat, some examples of collaborative tech to allow access for contributions. Great question. We're going to dig a bit more into that in the examples. Pressbooks, I've used Pressbooks with students. I've used Hypothesis with students to have students annotate and tag for problems. I've seen teachers use Google Docs. I've seen teachers use Microsoft Teams. There's a lot of different technology out there. You can even use the wiki pages in Canvas if your institution uses Canvas, and to do that, right, to make those contributions. But I do recognize at the same time that a lot of our learning technologies are not built for this, right? They're built for the transmission of information from teacher to student. And I think it's important to understand that in many cases, we're working around the edges to make this happen. Okay, I'm going to move on from renewable assignments because we've taken a good bit of time. Again, evidence for this. I will say, and I do want to emphasize, this is not empirically strong evidence yet. This is empirically uncertain at the moment because it's a pretty new idea and we haven't had a chance. And I want to be clear about this. We haven't had a chance to really do empirical studies, do well-controlled studies of the impact of renewable assignments on student learning. And I think that that's an important point to hit. So based in strong theory, yes, does increase student engagement, but empirically uncertain, or actually, I would say empirically weak. See, even I get these wrong sometimes. So high structure, why high structure? I'll start this with another warning, and I'll lead off of that same warning about the empirical weakness. I don't know of any, and if you do know of one, please let me know. I have a note here. If you know, or actually, sorry, it's a note somewhere in here. If you know of a study that compares high structure learning with low structure learning and the impact of those practices on the outcomes of the students, please let me know, because I'm looking for this study and I want this study, right? Because it's a really interesting concept. Now, what do I mean by high structure or low structure? High structure basically means giving more detailed guidance and giving more detailed feedback, right? And one of the really tricky things about this concept is that for different students, high structure looks different, right? For a high school, what is high structure for a high school student could be unbearably high structure for a graduate student, right? And what is high structure for a graduate student could be completely and totally impenetrable to a junior high student. And so as students learn, the amount of structure that they require becomes less and less. And that's kind of founded in some of the ideas of scaffolding and some scaffolded learning and some really fundamental learning sciences theories that have been pretty well proven and pretty well addressed. What I don't know of is any study that meaningfully is able to measure what exactly structure is in like a reproducible way, and then uses that reproducible description of structure to talk about or to compare high and low structure learning environments. I'm really fascinated by the idea of that study. Maybe it's, if I can't find one, if someone doesn't have one to give, I might have to do that study myself. But what I can say is that high structure, right, the giving of students more detailed instructions, kind of assignments taking less time, right? Not doing a project-based whole class, but instead splitting that project into parts and walking the students through each part, giving them feedback on each part, as like that's higher structure. That is theoretically much better for the students, theoretically especially much better for students from marginalized backgrounds. And there's some, and I give references here. Here's kind of the theoretical background, right? Students are having to spend less extraneous cognition, figuring out, what am I supposed to do in this assignment? What does this assignment mean? They can focus more on how am I applying the the details of this course, right? It goes back to scaffolding, which is actually a pretty old idea where learning sciences ideas go. And so I'm comfortable because it's very theoretically well-based in including this idea in high structured renewable assignments, in advocating for its use, but I don't know of a direct comparison. Isla, is predictability a complementary term for course structure? I heard a comment once that course structure should be utterly predictable, but course content should be interesting and amazing. That's a really interesting comment in the chat. Thank you for that. That's a really interesting question. Is predictability a complementary term for course structure? I think complementary in the sense that they go well together. I do think that they go well together. I think that so we can talk about within course structure and increasing within course structure, right? So when I say within course structure, I mean, for example, providing weekly activities for your or saying, okay, there's a weekly knowledge check quiz in this course. You should try to complete it weekly, as opposed to having a knowledge check quiz kind of randomly scattered throughout the quarter. That structure, that predictability can help students. There can also be predictability between courses where students know, oh, like generally this is the way that my teachers teach. This is the way that they organize their Canvas courses. And for both of those, predictability, I think, is a really good thing because it allows students to get in a routine. It allows students to not spend extraneous cognition going, wait a minute, is there a quiz this week? And sometimes there's a quiz, sometimes there's not, and not extraneous cognition going, where the hell is that thing in the Canvas page, right? We want their cognition focused on what they're learning, applying what they're learning. They're not learning to navigate a Canvas. They're not in college to learn to navigate a Blackboard course. They're in college to learn the content, and that's where the focus should be, or learn the patterns of thinking that we're trying to teach. So I think it's a complementary term, and it's a really interesting space of thinking. And I kind of agree with that idea that course structure should be predictable, but course content should be interesting and amazing. And I'll go beyond content to say, and this is part of what I'm trying to get at here with structured renewable assignments. How do we make assignments interesting and amazing? How do we make not content, but how do we make assignments interesting and amazing? Okay, speaking of which, we've gone way too long with that on activity, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to get all the questions and trying to get to the ideas, and I'm excited about these things. Okay, basic idea to take away from this. The idea of structured renewable assignments is to bring all these things together, to bring together active learning, to bring together high structure active learning, to bring together renewable assignments into one thing that all together is more powerful, right? To use, just to jump back to that airplane metaphor, to use the whole airplane. So we're going to move into an exercise. This is an exercise you can do on your own. This is an exercise you could jump into chat and do. This is an exercise that I invite you to work on and think about. And it's really a question of, like, again, thinking through this for yourself. And I'll give a good 5 minutes for everyone to do this, right? Choose an assignment, technology, documentation, really any artifact you want to work with. Think about the right size of contribution. What length or depth of artifacts should learners and other contributors be asked to make or edit? So how do you can think about this as, how do I increase structure in this learning activity? That might be limiting time frame. It might be limiting the length of the contribution. It might be thinking about the right length for the feedback that you give, making it renewable. Thanks for that note. Making it renewable, ensuring learning students or learners or contributors are asked to. So how do I make this renewable? How do I create something new, revise, or mix existing OER? And now that the assignment is renewable, look for opportunities again to increase the amount of feedback, because feedback is really key, both to structure and to learners. That feedback doesn't have to come from you as a teacher. It can come through peer review. It can come through open review, right? Students contributing to a Wikipedia page often get feedback from other editors of that Wikipedia page, right? So I'm going to bring this back up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in a different Chrome window, so you should all be able to continue seeing this Chrome window. What I'm going to do is in a different Chrome window, I'm going to start a Google Doc that's going to have all of this in it, and I'll share that Google Doc to the chat. You all can work and chat in that Google Doc if you want to. You could work on your own, right? Grab an assignment from your Canvas page, walk through these steps. And you could annotate this in a hypothesis with your thoughts or questions. This is really a time for you to start working on applying these ideas and thinking about them in your context. So again, 5 minutes and we'll come back. I do want to get to the examples and to the design principles that we found, but I want you to have the context of doing this work yourself to come into that thinking, because I think you learn more from the examples and from the design research. So again, 5 minutes. Please ask questions in chat. Amy, you're going to have to tell me if this is kosher, but I'm totally comfortable with people unmuting and just asking me questions if you prefer. And again, there'll be a Google Doc coming up shortly. And 5 minutes goes fast when you're having fun and active learning, in my opinion. Okay, I'm going to hang out in that dock for a little bit after we end, but I know we are 4 minutes away from the ending here, and I wanted to show you a couple other things in that press books that you could use if you want to, and talk just a little bit about the feedback we got from students in an endocrinology course who did a number of these types of assignments. So I'm going to move to examples of structured renewable assignments. These are a bunch of examples that I've curated, right? Tagging an open textbook. Again, that's really structured because students are given specific tags to look for in their reading. But those tags then allow others to go back through and do a better edit of that textbook. Open exam and quiz repositories, there's really great examples of this, of students writing quiz questions. Really to understand how to assess something, you have to understand it really well. I think this is a really great example. Open textbook contribution peer review, right? This is one of the assignment designs we used. We gave a structured rubric to students where they could go in and rate other students' contributions to an open textbook. That structured rubric really walked them through both what we would expect from an open textbook and walked them through the peer review process to help them prepare to be future scientists. Glossary entries is another great one. That's one that students really liked. The idea of writing introductory materials can be high structure. Early feedback for students on from students on structured renewable assignments are that it is excellent. They love it. I'm being genuine about this. We got so many positive comments from students about this. They also had a lot of great feedback about how to do it. Get the size right was one thing that was really important. Like, okay, if you're going to have us tag text, don't ask us to tag 2 chapters, maybe half a chapter, maybe a few paragraphs. If you really want to get in depth with the ideas of that paragraph, come back to ideas, give opportunities to contribute multiple times to the same chunk of text so that you can really start to ingest those ideas, right, as a student. But also try to structure these assignments so that students can connect across the course, right? So a glossary assignment can be a great way to do this, where students are writing a glossary entry so they get one particular idea really strongly, and then across the whole glossary, they're connecting across the course. But another idea, if you want a separate assignment to have students think about the course as a whole, is actually to have them organize the table of contents for a book, right? We don't often think about, we want students to write chapters, we want students to write essays or contributions. What about writing the table of contents of a body of work, right? It can be really high structure, give really high feedback. Oh, you're missing this piece, but it's really different. Where you can make it easy, and I'll end on this point, where you can make it easy. Learning is hard. It's always hard. We know it's hard. We've done a lot of it in our lives. We've spent a lot of time on it. Lots of studies show that if you can make a piece easy, that's more cognition for students to spend on the important things that they care about. So I'll end on that note. That's the feedback from our students. You've got some examples. You've got some time to work on creating high structure learning assignments. I hope that you'll have a chance to take this away and think about it in your context. I hope that this won't be just another, I mean, let's be honest, conferences, for all the wonderful ideas that they share, aren't always the best place to ingest ideas and to practice them and to think about them and to use them more deeply. And I hope that you'll have an opportunity to do that with whatever ideas you find useful from this conference. Thank you so much. If we don't need to close the room, I'm happy to hang around and answer questions. If we do, thank you again. And thank you, Amy. Thank you all for trusting me with a bit of your time today.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, if there are any questions, we do need to close the room, but we have a couple minutes. Yeah, that was great. And Peter, if you want to share, if you're in the Discord, if you want to share the link to the to that press books in the
I'll do that.
slide deck channel, yeah, that'd be great.
Whew, man, 50 minutes goes by so fast. Hi, Carol.
It does.
Hi, I do have one quick question. So, for example, one of the renewable exercises that I have my students do is they create an infographic on leadership. It's a small group class. And I'm sometimes always tempted to show them previous work of previous students, but then I get that from the current students.
Right.
So
Yeah.
how do you juggle
Mhm.
making something open for people to be
Mhm.
able to see without polluting,
Yeah.
or poisoning the process
Yep.
for them to create something new?
That's a really great question, and it's a really important idea. So a couple of thoughts on that, and this is something I'd love to do more research on. And in fact, I've seen it show up in a really weird way. Where in the endocrinology course that we worked in, we had a note packet from a former teacher, and we saw students taking up the former teacher's writing style, which was incredibly detail oriented and like in ways that weren't terribly useful, like the bad things as well as the good things, but the bad things too we saw showing up. And we were like, wait a minute, how do we disrupt this? So couple of thoughts. And it's a really good question. Practices that I've seen be effective in not kind of creating that reproduction of exactly the same thing is if you can hone it down to give them principles, like here are the ideas of what I want rather than here is what I want. That can be really helpful. If you do want to show that example, I would say student stress is a major contributor to lack of creativity and original thinking. And so if you can give those, like really prime the students to say, we're going to take 3 minutes in class and I want you to look at the examples. And then I want you to have 3 minutes of silence where you sit back. And this is, again, the structured part. You're structuring in the creativity. Sit back and imagine what you want to create from scratch. And we're going to have 3 minutes of silence where you just do that. And it's, again, it's guiding those students to like a small chunk of time that they're spending. I do find silence incredibly potent and powerful. You might also structure that. And again, this is just adding another piece. Go look for infographics that you like. Talk about why you like them, right? Talk about what you want to adopt from other infographics. And we've done things like that where students have tagged other materials and gone, oh, I really like this idea. We should include this idea. I hope that's helpful. That's a really great question.
Yeah, it is. And just looking at the infographic example, I hadn't really thought about just showing them other infographic samples and not just the previous ones on, leadership is what they're creating infographics for. And so, rather than just directing them to some of these sites where they can create, or, PowerPoint templates, maybe I'll just send them, this is a really good infographic, and, the Edward Tufte approach. This is why this is really good.
Right. I love that. Why
like
this is really good. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and create in the chat here, bring pictures of magazines or posters, right? You could apply, and sometimes this near application, this near transfer of like, oh, this isn't an infographic, but it's communicating information in a magazine. That gets me thinking differently, right? About that infographic. So I like that.
All right, folks, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording here.